Vamos a comenzar por la presentación del doctor Dan Denison. El doctor Dan Denison, como les mencioné, es el presidente, el chairman de Denison Consulting, a su vez profesor eméritos de EMD Business School en Suiza, y anteriormente fue profesor de programas doctorales y de maestría en la Universidad de Michigan. Así que los dejo con su interesante presentación. Buenos días. De hecho, la presentación del doctor Denison va a ser en inglés, pero por favor siéntase en la libertad de hacer las preguntas en español, ya que vamos a estar aquí traduciendo las mismas si es necesario, por parte de la maestra Magdalena Santos, socia senior y cofundadora de DOD Consulting Group, y este servidor. Así que pasen buenos días y disfruten la presentación. Adelante, go ahead, Dr. Denison.
Gracias, Milton. And thank you so much, Carla. Hola y bienvenidos al primero Simposio Latinoamericano. Yo hablo un poco de español, pero es muy malo. Pero entonces cambio a inglés ahora. But as Milton said, if you have questions, please raise them. Glad to do a little bit of translation here. And maybe I understand, but probably better to try to do it in English. Thank you. I keep studying, keep trying. And let me share my presentation here, because I'm delighted to be able to join you today and to give a little bit of a background on the work that we've done, and background for the two outstanding presentations that we have today with two very important clients. And really thank Milton, Alejandro, Carla, the whole team, and as well as our partners in Chile and Argentina. We're really delighted to be able to be with you today. I guess the first thing I'd like to do is just give a little bit of an overview of how we see organizational culture, what it is, why it's important to business. Then I also want to give a perspective on how the culture of the organization influences the performance of the business. So I want to show you just a little bit of research, because understanding and predicting patterns of performance has been a cornerstone of our practice since the very beginning, and this continues, and I know this is of high interest, and glad to present that. Then I also want to spend some time talking about how leadership connects with organizational culture. They're two sides of the same coin, and we work at both of those levels. That's an important part of what we do, and especially take a minute to look at the board of directors' perspective on organization culture and what we see some of the organizations that we work with around the world doing to make sure that the board is fulfilling their responsibilities in terms of keeping the organization vital, alive, and prosperous. Okay, so let's get started here. A lot of times people have described culture as being like an iceberg. There's some things that you see on the future, but most of the important things like personal values and attitudes and the underlying assumptions in an organization aren't really very visible on the surface. This builds up over time. Culture always reflects the lessons that we learn over time, and we believe are important enough to pass down to this next generation. A culture is always made up of the lessons that we've learned while we survive together over time. So it's very dynamic. We keep learning the lessons, we keep building the culture that's based on what we've learned in the past, but it also takes a strong hand of leadership to shape this for the future and anticipate what's going to be needed. And now more than ever, we'll also share later in the presentation an overview of what we've seen in organizations over these past couple of years. Quite surprising results that we've had, and also gives us a little bit of time to focus on what some of the lessons are that we've learned in these last couple of years. So a lot of culture is based in habits and routines. We can't think up everything. We can't make up everything, 100%. We have to rely on habits, routines, rituals, procedures, business process that build up over time. They're perfected, but there's a big human component in the learning that it takes to implement and to keep evolving the habits and routines. Over 100 years ago, William James said, the more of the details of our daily life we can hand over to the effortless custody of automation, the more our higher powers of mind will be set free for their proper work. So we're always trying to go on cruise control, always trying to go on autopilot. And we need to focus our attention on what part are we going to change. Because we rely for efficiency and for scale on an enormous set of habits and routines that build up over time. And one of the things that we learned in our last book was that, not all of these habits are good things. We started describing habits in terms of what we call good old habits, that are the things that are the foundation of your organization. They made it succeed over time, and they'll make it succeed in the future. We want to preserve and strengthen. But some of the habits that we create in organizations are also, not so good. We call them bad old habits. They're probably better suited to the corporate museum than they are to the strategic plan for the future, because these habits were better suited to the past they will be to the future. So for those, we need to unlearn and leave behind. So there are also new habits that we're constantly in the process of forming. And, we talked about those in terms of good new habits, where we're encountering a new situation, like responding to the pandemic. We need to invent new habits, new procedures, new processes, and we need to perfect that. Because it's not obvious at first when we're creating good new habits what's really going to work. And so we also identified what we call bad new habits, where yes, something was done that was in response to a new situation, but it's not working. So we need to rethink and try again. So asking organizations to think of culture in terms of the rituals, habits, and routines helps bring this, this plane from, 10,000 meters down till it's ready to land here, because habits, routines speak to everyone at all levels in the organization. And once we understand those, then we can get in there and start trying to fix and improve those. Because our theory, and we've written a lot about this, glad to share the articles with you, we've written a lot about how organizations change, and have really focused on this concept of keystone habits. Now, a keystone habit is one where when you make the first change, the rest follows. And so the important point is figuring out, where do you intervene? Where's the point that gives you the most leverage? Where's the point that if we get this first step right, the rest will unfold? Every day, we wake up with this vision and hope that the big, kind of HR rollout of global culture change will just, move forward today in an orderly, predictable way. I'm an optimist, no question. But I've never seen it work that way. That's not the way that it works. The way that it works is that some parts of the organization lead. They try innovative new things. They maybe take a little risk, but they learn fast. And from there, we start to build on that momentum as those changes ripple through the organization. So, an organization that wants to change from a product to a service business. Well, the first steps are quite hard. But once you make that change and that's successful, then that has a ripple effect. Then it can spread. One time we worked with a big engineering company, European company, and they saw that the real point of intervention was on pricing and proposals. Because what they would do, and I'm sure some of your organizations do this too, is they'd get a request from a customer, and then it would take them a long time to put together a proposal. And you ask why, and they said, well, nobody knows how to price the mix, the bundle of products and services. We have great engineering project and products. We're building the service component, but how do we do that? At the same time, that's one of the parts of the business that was growing the fastest was 10-year service contracts. This is big kind of industrial automation. So they looked at the process by which they priced, and what they found was that they would spend 6 weeks arguing about which P&L, which profit and loss center in the organization would get credit for all the elements of their pricing in the product and service side, while the customer waited. You got an answer? Can you give us a proposal? And that was the point of intervention. Once they changed that set of habits and built on that small core of people that knew both the product and the service parts of the business, that's when the organization really started to grow and to succeed. So that's our approach. And a little bit, we've written a lot about this. It's obviously a complicated issue, but that's a quick overview of how we look at culture and culture change. We set this process in motion many times through using our culture model. This grew up over time out of research that I did first at the University of Michigan and then at IMD Business School on how the culture of the organization influences the performance of the business. And the research, our research and others too, defined 4 main traits that are really important. The first one is mission. Do you know where you're going? Is there a clear picture of the future? Is there a strategy, a vision, a set of goals and objectives that translate that into terms that everyone understands? That's the first, and in many cases, that's the important part of it. And this falls primarily on the leaders at the top. Now, once you have that at the top, then you only win by cascading across many levels of the organization. But if you don't have it at the top, or if you have it at the top but it doesn't go down very far, our analysis, our methodology always uncovers that, puts a clear light on those gaps and opportunities, and that's one of the key ways that we help organizations to change. These 3 indexes, like all of the indexes in our model, are measured by 4 items each, and so you get feedback on each of those that's benchmarked against 1,000 organizations that we maintain as a benchmark database. Second concept that's really important is adaptability. Are you creating change? Are you learning, taking risk, innovating, and most important of all, focusing on the customer? Understanding the customer point of view and building the organization that responds to them helps us translate the demands of the environment into action, and that's one of the key drivers of change. Both mission and adaptability are externally focused, outside of the organization. It's about how we adapt, because culture means we have to solve 2 problems at the same time. We have to adapt externally as we integrate internally. And so the bottom half of the model focuses on the internal factors, involvement, focuses on how people are aligned, how they're engaged. We measure their empowerment, the capability, development processes in the organization, and their capacity to work as a team. Those are the three factors. And last but not least comes the foundation, consistency. We need to have core values, ability to reach agreement even when there's many different points of view, and to a system that's tightly coordinated and integrated. Bottom half of the model focuses internally. The factors on the left side emphasize flexibility. The ones on the right side emphasize stability. We need all four of these at once. And top performing organizations, as you'll see in a minute, have all four of these characteristics. In the center of the model is a little gray, circle called beliefs and assumptions. That's at the core of every organization. The people make the place. It's the beliefs and assumptions and the mindset of the leaders, the founders, the members of the organization that are always the foundation. It's hard to measure beliefs and assumptions in a way that allows you to compare them. So we've focused at this level of values and behavior that allows us to measure and to understand the impact on performance. So, we use this model and the survey to generate a profile. And this is a profile of an old manufacturing company. Their best days are, at this point, seemed like they were behind them. They're declining. They're trying to hold on to the past. They're missing some targets. Very operationally focused. And so they have an interesting profile. The more color, the better. And the numbers are from 1 to 100. They're percentile scores. And that represents the percentage of organizations in the benchmark database that scored lower than this 100-year-old manufacturing company. So you see, when it comes to direction, they're really good at focusing on goals and objectives, very operational. They're not very strategic. They're not very visionary. President said, yeah, I'm the guy that makes the trains run on time. Not a visionary, not a strategist, and that's reflected. Goals and objectives on a short-term basis is the way the organizations run. Doesn't help them for long-term planning. Not very adaptable. Their strongest area that makes it a challenge to be adaptable is, in fact, their high level of internal consistency. That's their highest score, core values. And yeah, they have a great set of core values, but they're suited to the past. One of their executives said, yeah, our core values are perfectly suited to meet the challenges of the 2000 of the past, not the future. It needs to change, okay? Values can have continuity, but they need to be expressed in terms that work today. And then, the last one in involvement, there's no empowerment. There's not capability development. So real limitations, but strong team orientation. And that one kind of made me scratch my head. So I asked them, what's going on with that? And they said, yes, we're a team, all right. So we're a team going down together. So they saw themselves as kind of singing, Kumbaya, holding hands by the campfire, as they sort of declined, where people were very tightly connected to their local team, but not very good at working effectively across the organization. So that's a little bit of an overview of how we use the model, we use the survey to create a profile. And as I said, this is rooted in research on what makes business high performers. So, for example, this is a study. I promise I'm a professor, not too many studies here. There's lots of them on our webpage if you want to go there. We do lots of research. Always happy to share that and discuss it. But this is a simple summary of a private equity firm that we work with that has 60 portfolio companies. And this graph just shows the top 30 in terms of the culture scores compared to the bottom 30. So no surprise, the culture score is much higher in the top, much lower in the bottom half. But the interesting part is when we look to the performance. And here's what I want you to look at. The growth in profitability in EBITDA in the top 30 companies was 17% annually. So rapid growth in profitability. Strong growth in sales, wide range here. Some of them grew very quickly, some were struggling. But the important thing is that these performance characteristics are closely associated with strong scores on the culture survey. How about over here? Well, the bottom 30 had kind of second, mostly first quartile scores, some single digit, didn't invest much in capability, and their profitability was shrinking. Their sales were shrinking. So this is the kind of research that we do, and because the development of this model is rooted in research on how culture influences the performance of the business. Here's another one. This is with 130 firms, publicly listed, traded on the stock exchanges, and no question, the top 25%, are a lot stronger than the bottom 25. But look at the performance differences. Return on assets is about 50% higher for this set of companies. But look at sales. The top 25% had sales growth of over 20%. This is in publicly traded companies. Sales growth in the bottom 25, very low. Market to book ratio, the value of the firm in the marketplace, was also a big difference. That's for a firm with the same, book assets, that's over 50% higher stock price, market valuation. So this research is a key part of what we do. We do it in many forms, safety, innovation. This one's about customer satisfaction. This is in a set of car dealerships in the service centers. And on the right side, you see the profile for the organizations, the dealerships that have over 80% of their customers are highly satisfied. On the left side are the profile of the dealerships where less than half are highly satisfied. So this is a different, design. This looked at the high-performing dealerships in terms of customer satisfaction, then went back and asked about their culture. So this gives you an overview of the kind of research that we do and why we think it's important. And this diagram kind of describes that. The top half of the model, adaptability and mission, are good predictors of growth. The bottom half, good predictors of operating performance. The innovators tend to have strong scores on the left-hand side here. And then the companies that have the most stable performance over time tend to emphasize mission and consistency. So this gives you a good overview and background of our model, the way we use it to create profiles, the research that validates that approach by showing that culture is something that has a strong impact on performance. We work at several levels, as I mentioned, on the culture change. One of the most unique things about our organization is that we focus not only at the individual level on engagement and satisfaction, but at the organization level. Our diagnostic is an assessment of the organizational culture, the organization as a system. But we also have a complementary leadership development process, a 360 survey tool that gives you feedback on this same model, on all of these same dimensions. And then our practice moves from diagnosis to action. It's based on research, and we're also operating all around the world with many partners and lots of active projects in many different parts of the world, including, of course, in Latin America. And we've got a really strong set of partners there, and so we're really looking forward to this next step and making some more investments in how to help build the business there. But it's this combination, moving from diagnosis to action, having an impact, combining the diagnostic expertise with the consulting practice that it takes to drive change, and doing that both at the leadership development level and at the organization culture level. Because leadership and culture are two sides of the same coin. Which came first? Does the culture create the leaders, or do the leaders create the culture? The answer is yes. Now, over a short period of time, if you come into a new role in a new company and you think, they'll learn, I will shape them. Even if you're the CEO or chairman, you've got your work cut out for you. So over the short term, culture has a huge impact on the kind of leaders that join, on the way that they shape those leaders' behavior. But then over a little longer period of time, where does the culture come from? Well, it comes from the leaders. It comes from the people. The people make the place. So, we're very conscious of the fact that a lot of the initiatives that change organizations come from all different directions. They come from the customer, the marketplace, into the organization. They come from the bottom up. They come from the top down. It's the role of the leaders and of the people, the members of the organization, to make the workplace, to make the organization, because that's what has the most lasting impact. We can sit in the boardroom or in a conference room and plan how we're going to change the organization. And in fact, many times, we do exactly that. But it's important to understand that you cannot do this as a top-down process, especially today. There's so much knowledge that's on the front line of the organization, that's in the hearts and minds of the people who've spent their careers in the organization. And, they're always a source of knowledge. Sometimes they're a source of resistance, frustration. That happens for sure. No question about that. But they're always a source of knowledge. And so, we've tried to create an inclusive process where we're involving people. The process of sharing the results in a survey, the process of helping people understand, develop a common understanding of the results, and the actions that it implies is an integral part of our change process. And sometimes that happens in dozens and even if not hundreds of teams working together at multiple levels throughout the organization to help define the future and to help create that and make it work. So, those are some of the lessons. And there's there's lots of comments in the chat box and some questions. I want to talk for a minute about some of the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic. But if you'd like, we can also take a break now and address some of the questions that are being raised in the chat and in the Q&A. Milton, Carla, what's your advice?
Yes, absolutely. There are plenty of questions people are asking. So very interesting, Dan, Dr. Denison, in the process. Let me say something in Spanish for the audience. Están preguntando si la vamos a tener en español. Sí, la vamos a tener en español. Esta presentación se va a subir en YouTube y precisamente cuando se suba en YouTube va a tener, pues obviamente, la traducción simultánea. De hecho, sabemos del tema técnico de que Zoom permite hacer cierta traducción. El equipo técnico a la parte está trabajando, tratando de activar, pero aparentemente durante tener el webinar en vivo, pues ha sido un poco difícil. Okay, let's go to the question. We have a couple of questions here, very interesting one.
Great,
we have
great.
Luis Arturo is asking, the culture can be changed with sanctions and rewards, or it depends more of the values and convictions of the individuals or leaders in the organization?
Yes, we need to get those aligned. We need to get all of our systems pointing the same way and understand that reflects our values our principles, and it also reflects a shared understanding of what it will take to compete in the future, in the marketplace, because we can have our values, but if they're not well suited, if they're the values that address the needs of the past, we're not going to be very successful. And certainly systems, structures, rewards are all important to align to support this behavior. That's a key supporting role, and that's often a big responsibility of leaders, is not only to get the ball rolling, but to ensure that you keep it rolling. You're in an organization, you're trying to become more focused on the customer. What happens when a salesperson makes an accommodation for a customer and they say, no, you can't do that? Well, the moment of truth there, says that the primary importance of the customer doesn't have the support of the systems and rewards within the organization. So we need to get aligned on the combination of things. Buen pregunta. Gracias.
So we have Paola Andrea that is asking, first of all, say thank you, Dr. Denison. So she is asking how the cultural benchmark have moved in the recent years. There are new trends. Do we have any public benchmark statistics?
Yes, and that's actually part of what I will talk about next, because we have some really interesting results from the pandemic era that show that there are some trends and some good ones, interesting as that may be, and that in general we see a little improving trend in the benchmark database that we update every year or two. It's a global benchmark. We also do have kind of industry benchmarks, regional benchmarks that we use, and do a lot of research on that we'll be glad to share with you. But to speak directly to that point is kind of the next couple of slides. I can move on if you want, or we can take another question.
Well, let's have one here that is very, very interesting.
Good.
Do we have Patricia who's asking, how do you manage breakthrough cultural change when you have a very heavy culture and you are trying to make 180 degrees change as you realize that is what is needed?
Great question. Thank you. What you find is that change happens not at the core, but on the edge, on the periphery. The new, innovative, sometimes even things that don't work, that fail, generate the most learning. And, so if you have a technology that has a lot of promise, you don't don't have them make their presentation for funding to the leaders of the other business units that manage the mature technologies. They'll decide it isn't really needed. You need to, in some ways, incubate the new technologies, the new ideas, let them get off the ground. I spent 17 years at IMD Business School, and just down the street from us was Nespresso coffee. Not as good as Café de Loya in Mexico, or native, but great coffee made out of capsules. Well, Nespresso was founded by Nestle, and what did they do? Well, they created an entire headquarters, office, startup team apart from the corporate center, because for them it was a profound difference. Nespresso, oh my God, they're selling machines that make coffee How many machines did Nestle make before Nespresso? Not very many. They're a food business. So they separated it. And you know, it went for probably almost 15 years, certainly 10, before they started to really transfer people from Nestle to Nespresso. And they did that when they were trying to figure out how to help Nespresso scale, grow, get bigger. So, you know, you have to take care of the new innovations and give them a chance to grow, fund them, and once they are standing on their own, give them the independence to scale, because it's always possible that the core business will fight to prevent the innovative business from winning and taking over. And so you have to very actively facilitate that process and separate them. And the wins, the biggest wins, are when the new starts taking over the core and the old, because then they can interject what they've learned that's new back to revitalize the core. But at the beginning, got to keep them separate.
Good. So we can continue then, and then we can take another.
Yeah. Let me just show a couple more slides on what we've learned from the pandemic era, and then we can come back for some more discussions and more questions. I welcome that and enjoy it a lot. Real surprise. We were all so focused, the fear, confusion, the uncertainty, across the board, personal, professional, we were concerned with surviving, what was going to work, how were we going to make it through. And as we go back and look, what we found in 2020 is that scores actually increased. Now, this is, the scale on the left-hand side of this chart here is the percentile scores of the overall sample from that era. So, you see that in 2019, before the pandemic, it was down, near the base for that year, because 50 would be average. And it's increased by, almost 10 points, which is a huge change. It has, declined a little bit here in 2021, but this made us very aware of how much learning has gone on, how much is new, how much people have delivered when their backs are against the wall. Even though there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of struggle, and I don't mean to diminish that for a second, but it's important to also see the tremendous amount of learning that's taken place. Look at what's changed the most. Different parts of the organization often cooperate. They coordinate to drive change. The way things are done is flexible. It's easy to coordinate. We've delegated authority, meeting short-term demands without losing sight of the long-term vision. Those are the areas where we saw the highest scores, and they were significantly higher during this pandemic era. So, and this was with 140 organizations, so it's a decent sample. There's a lot of exceptions. There's no question about that. But, we have tremendous hope when we look at the enormous amount of learning that organizations have undergone. How about digitalization? How's that working in your organization? Well, it's still not easy. It's still a struggle. How much progress have we made? we've made enormous progress. And I think one of the biggest challenges is to kind of understand that and understand where do we get it right these last couple of years and how do we continue to build on that. One area that's a little lower that our research also identified is core values. Maintaining a set of core values, maintaining an ethical code, those can be challenging when we're pulled in so many different directions, but that's a relatively small decline compared to the large improvements. I never thought that we would see this, but this has helped focus our attention on the learning process and how people are capturing that so that they can continue to leverage it for the future. Okay, so enough slides. Now, let's just take our last, it's a quarter to, and let's just take a few minutes for any discussion points, any good questions, any difficult questions there that you, or easy questions too. I like easy questions, that's all right.
Yeah, that's a good one. By the way, we have an explosion of questions right here.
Great.
Let me take another questions that we have. Alejandra asked the question: how does a company unique business model, example, efficiency-driven, customer-driven, reflects on their culture DNA?
Yeah, great question. One of the important ways to look at culture is that it's a way that we store knowledge. Routines and habits in particular, a lot of research and writing, and that's how we store skills. Just think of the apprentice model that went on for centuries. All right, you learn things that are intuitive. You learn them through action. You learn them through practice. That's the way that we build the ethic in the company. That's the way that we build the culture. And so it's always important to understand that culture is quite a mix of, things. I mean, yeah, it's the habit of a good, carpenter, measure twice, cut once, and if you're a young, carpenter, you learn that fast, or else. Now you might also, learn that when you were having coffee breaks, and so we combine the habits, the context, how we learn, how we interact, who's a member of the group, who's not. Those get confounded with the expertise that we need to make the business work. And so it's always really important to combine this with your talent agenda, because one business is all about efficiency and the other one is all about customization and flexibility toward the customer. And we're moving our organization to a SaaS business model. Well, that's going to fit quite well with the efficiency, although putting all that expertise onto a computer platform rather than in the hands of the people that have implemented that for years, that can be quite a struggle. But on the other side, the organization that's focused on the customer, they'll say, well, how can we represent all of this, on a SaaS business model? And people find amazingly creative ways every day. But you do have to connect the culture change agenda to the talent agenda and be clear. Get your, put down your bets on which skill sets are most important to the competitive advantage of the organization. that's a challenging and difficult question that you raise, and actually it's one of those ones is easier in theory than it is in practice, because culture, and if you go off reading anthropology, as I did at one point in my career, you find that it's always a curious mix of meaning and function. So we need both of those, because it's not only about what we do, but it's about how we do it and who we do it with. Well, you have to change that for the future. It's a complex process, but the skill set, the capabilities have to be top of mind from start to finish.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Denison. Sure. We have another very interesting question that say, when the leadership is not comfortable with the feedback, with the organizational culture feedback, how we can manage that?
Good question. Very, very challenging. First, it depends on where you are. If this question is coming from a board member, you've got some leverage, and you need to bring the pressure on the leaders of the organization to understand the importance of culture to the business. Now, more often, I'm a middle manager and I've got some bright ideas and I've been pretty successful, but I'm not winning the day at convincing upper leadership that it's time for a change. Really, I go back to some of the classics in managing change. John Kotter in particular, and his key there is that you establish a vision, you build the business case and urgency for that vision, and then you build a guiding coalition. So if you're in the middle of the organization, you're trying to build coalitions in alignment with a long-term perspective that's compelling. And, we did work a few years ago in one of the, kind of big box retailer, home improvement, Home Depot kind of organizations. And, all of the leaders at that time grew up in the era when they knew how to deliver growth, build more stores, okay? And for probably 20 years, the growth of those big box retailers was associated with building more stores. Then one of the competitors showed up, and this is probably almost 10 years ago now. They delivered growth without adding new stores. They shrunk the number of stores and increased the revenue. It's like, oh my God, how did we do that? And online sales, lots of different innovations, but it wasn't until they had a change in the leadership that they were able to really accelerate that transition. They were aware of it. They did some good things. They made some progress. That was important, but they couldn't really fully embrace the lessons of the environment that they'd grown up in. So if we're trying to make the change happen today and we're not the chairman of the board, you need to help define, become an expert in the vision and the business case for the change that you believe in, and build a coalition wherever you can in the organization. There's got to be some executives in there someplace that see what you do and are willing to help and see the same sense of urgency. And there's certainly a set of peers and people that you can cultivate in your own organization that you're growing in the model of the future that you want to create. But, and don't forget the first rule of being an effective change agent. Stay alive. And there are a few great changes in history that have been led by martyrs, but I don't recommend it as a career strategy. But, just being conscious of the stakes and clear that of how you're going to try. Give it your best. Learn as much as you can. You also, many times in that case, you're an agent of change ahead of your time, and maybe your biggest lesson is what you learn in this job that you apply in the next one, because change does create a lot of disruption.
Good, very good. So, Dr. Denison, we have another very interesting question here from Brenda that said, in your experience, what are the best KPIs to measure the effectiveness of the cultural change?
Growth, I think is the most important thing, that when we make a change, we want to see an impact, we want to see it succeed. And I think that many times when you create a business change, it can be very difficult to show profitability the first stage, but you can see that the innovation is something that people react to. You certainly want to start with measuring the attitudes, behaviors, the culture, the survey measures. That's great. That's why we're here. But organizations that say our goal is to be above the 75th percentile in all 12 indexes on the Denison culture model aren't usually the ones that succeed at it. It's connecting the behavior with the business, and it's building a common understanding around the direction that you're, and alignment around the direction that you're creating for the future. Sometimes your recruiting, your retention, your people voting with their feet is also a really important metric. And just last comment, it depends totally on the organization and on the innovation that you're trying to create. And so as you're coming together with your colleagues and with your leaders to try to plan a change process, put that issue on the table. How can we best tell? Because I think growth is a sign of health. I think the culture survey measures, behavioral stuff is all good, point you in the right direction. But it's very important to get a metric in the business. One company said, we need 20 new accounts this next year of this particular shape and size. They had hundreds, but they defined a specific goal that was really, really closely connected to the change they were trying to create. And that was the metric that guided their action.
Thank you, Dr. Denison. Estamos ya próximo a las 10 de la mañana, hora de la Ciudad de México, para la próxima reunión. Sé que hay muchas preguntas. Vamos a capturarlas y voy a trabajar con el Dr. Denison para enviarle las respuestas de las mismas, porque no nos da tiempo. Agradecemos la gran participación de todas las preguntas que le han hecho al Dr. Denison. De hecho, repito, esta presentación del Dr. Denison en los próximos días va a estar en YouTube con la traducción, pues, para que puedan maximizar y adquirir, pues, el gran conocimiento y precisamente esta gran información que el doctor, con su amplia experiencia y como investigador, precisamente ha podido capturar a través de los 30 años de historia trabajando en tema de cultura organizacional. Thank you, Dr. Dan. We do appreciate absolutely the great insights that you did provide on this presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. El gusto es mío. And my best wishes to all of you. Nos vemos.
Gracias.
Hope to see you.